a folded napkin. White. Two equations written in pencil. It was sitting on top of a structural blueprint in a 12th floor office at one of the most respected engineering firms in Toronto. The young woman who found it had been awake for 31 hours. Her neck ached. Her coffee had gone cold twice. She had been the lead engineer on a project worth $340 million, and she was about to be pulled off it. She almost missed the napkin entirely. It had been tucked under the corner of the blueprint roll, so flat and so ordinary that it looked like something someone had used to wipe their hands. But the handwriting stopped her. Precise, architectural, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who has spent years making sure every mark means something. Two equations. And underneath them, a single line. Check the load path on column J7. Her hands went still. Because those two equations didn't just flag an error. They exposed a calculation that had been wrong since the foundation drawings were approved. A flaw that 3 senior engineers had signed off on. A flaw that, if the building were constructed as designed, would put 200 lives at risk. And they came from the last person anyone would have looked at twice. The woman who mopped the hallways. The one who came in at 10 p.m. and left before the sun came up. The one whose name was on the cleaning roster, but not on anyone's lips. The one who pushed her cart past glass offices, full of people with degrees on their walls, and never once knocked. She left 2 equations on a napkin, and when the project director checked the security footage and saw who wrote them, the entire firm went quiet. Because the cleaning woman had a secret, one she had been carrying for 11 years, and those 2 equations didn't just save a building. They cracked open a life that no one in that office had ever thought to ask about. If you've ever been the most qualified person in a room where no one knew your name, stay with me. Because what they found when they looked into the woman who mopped their floors, it will change how you see every person you pass in a hallway without stopping. Her name was Adaeze Nwosu. She was 38 years old. She had been cleaning the offices of Clifton Marsh Engineering for 11 years, ever since she arrived in Toronto from Lagos with 2 suitcases, a work permit, and a degree that Canada didn't recognize. She arrived at 10 p.m. every night. She left by 6 a.m. In between, she was the building's invisible rhythm. She knew which floor drain backed up when it rained. She knew the 3rd stall in the 2nd floor bathroom had a handle that needed to be held down for a full 3 seconds, or it wouldn't flush. She knew that the engineers on the 7th floor always left their whiteboards half erased, and the ones on the 12th floor left their coffee rings directly on top of the documents they were most stressed about. She knew the building. The building did not know her. The engineers walked past her the way people walk past streetlights, not with cruelty, with the specific kind of not seeing that comes from never having been trained to look. She was the woman with the mop, the woman with the cart with the squeaky left wheel, the woman in the dark green uniform who kept their world clean enough to think in. Peter Clifton, the managing director, had passed Adaeze in the lobby every week for 11 years. He could not have told you her name. He would have said, the cleaning lady, with a slight upward inflection, uncertain if she was even the same person or if the company rotated staff. Adaeze never pointed this out. She did her job. She was methodical. She mopped in overlapping figure eights because they covered more surface area with fewer passes. She restocked the supply rooms so that the most used items were always in front. She replaced the filters in the air handling units 2 weeks before they were scheduled because she had noticed they ran dustier in winter. And every night, after the last engineer shut off their monitor and the offices fell into the hum of the HVAC system, Adaeze worked the 12th floor last. Because the 12th floor was where they kept the current projects. She didn't move anything. She didn't copy anything. She photographed nothing. She simply cleaned around the drawings, the way a river moves around stone, and she read what was in front of her. The way a surgeon who has lost her scalpel still sees the anatomy in everything. Adaze read structural drawings because structural engineering was the only thing she had left of the woman she used to be. The only person in the building who spoke to Adaze beyond Don's "excuse me" was Marcus Webb, not a Webb of any firm. Just Marcus, security desk, lobby level, Tuesday through Saturday, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. with a travel thermos and a rotating stack of library books. "Evening, Doc," he said every night when she came through the door. It had started as a joke. First month she worked there, she'd corrected the grammar on a note someone had taped to the security desk. Visitors must sign in with a hyphen that didn't belong. She'd taken a pen from her pocket and crossed it out without thinking, then looked up and found Marcus watching her with his eyebrows raised. "You always do that?" "Only when it bothers me." "All right," he said. And from then on, she was Doc. "Evening. Marcus As, 12th floor's a mess tonight. I heard them arguing till almost 9 about the Garfield project. That's the one." He tapped his temple. "You know more about what goes on up there than they do." Adaze smiled, the kind of smile that lives mostly in the eyes, and pushed her cart to the elevator. Marcus watched her go every night. And every night he turned the same thing over in his mind, the thing he had been turning over for 11 years. Because cleaning staff don't slow down at a structural drawing and tilt their head at a specific angle. Cleaning staff don't pause at a whiteboard and then straighten one of the listed variables before continuing to mop. And cleaning staff don't quietly reroute their cart to avoid disturbing a document arrangement while still managing to dust underneath it. But Adaze did, every night, and Marcus had never asked why. There was one office she always cleaned quickly, without stopping. One where she kept her eyes on the floor and moved on, until the night she heard a sound through the glass partition that made her stop the cart and stand very still. It was not crying, exactly. It was quieter than that. The sound of someone trying not to make a sound while everything in them came undone. And that night changed everything. Chisholm Eze was 29 years old. She had been at Clifton Marsh for 13 months. She was the youngest structural engineer on the Garfield Tower project, one of 2 black women in the firm. She had graduated near the top of her class at the University of Toronto, turned down a position in Vancouver because Clifton Marsh had promised her real work, real responsibility, and a path to project lead before 30. They gave her Garfield. The Garfield Street Mixed-Use Tower. 42 stories, $340 million. A landmark development in the east end of the city that had been in planning for 3 years. Residential on top, commercial below, a public atrium at ground level, designed to be the kind of space that makes people feel a city cares about them. It was a beautiful project, and it was falling apart. The problem was in the load distribution model. The lead structural engineer, a man named Gerald Park, who had been at the firm for 22 years, had signed off on a foundation design in the second phase that Chisholm had flagged 6 weeks earlier. She had raised it in a meeting. She had sent an email. She had attached 3 pages of supplementary calculations. Gerald had reviewed it, consulted with the project director, and sent back 4 words. "We've already addressed this." They hadn't. Chisholm knew it. She had spent 6 weeks building the proof, running every scenario she could think of, and every single one came back with the same answer. The load path on the J-column series was being distributed on an assumption that the soil composition report didn't support. If the building was constructed on the approved design, the settlement differential over 10 years would compromise the structural integrity of the lower 8 floors. It wouldn't collapse tomorrow. It might not show visible stress for 5 years. But it would show stress. And when it did, the people living and working inside that building would be in danger. The project was 3 weeks from breaking ground. Gerald had escalated her concerns to Peter Clifton as an example of a junior engineer, quote, unable to accept that a design has moved past her objection. There was talk of reassigning her. She was in her office at 11:30 at night, alone, with her calculations spread across every surface, trying to find a way to say the same thing so loudly that someone would finally hear it. She wasn't crying because she was weak. She was crying because she had done everything right, and it hadn't been enough. She didn't know anyone was listening. But someone had been reading her work for 3 weeks. Someone who had seen the error the first night the Garfield drawings appeared on the 12th floor. Someone who had recognized it immediately, the way you recognize a wrong turn on a road you've driven 10,000 times. Someone who had said nothing. Because the last time Adaeze Nwosu spoke up about a structural flaw, about a miscalculation, about a truth buried inside a set of drawings, it had cost her everything. The hallway was empty. The overhead lights had switched to their overnight dim setting. Adaeze stood outside Chisholm's office, with her mop in one hand and her cart beside her, and she listened. She knew that sound, the specific quiet of it. She had heard it before, from a woman she had loved more than her own ambition. Her mother, Ngozi, the night the letter came from the Lagos state government. The letter that said the appeal had been denied. The letter that ended 17 years of her mother's work in one paragraph. Adaeze closed her eyes. She had a choice. The same choice she made every night. Move on. Stay invisible. Protect the life she had stitched together from the scraps of the one she'd lost. Or, she looked at the mop in her hand. She had been a licensed structural engineer in Nigeria. She had her degree from the University of Lagos, her professional certification. 5 years of postgraduate field experience on 3 major infrastructure projects in Lagos and Abuja. She had come to Canada with every document properly notarized and translated. She had applied to the professional engineers of Ontario within the first month of arriving. The process had taken 4 years. She had passed every exam. She had completed the experience requirements through a bridging program, designing drainage systems for a municipality while cleaning offices at night to keep herself housed. She had been 34 years old when she finally received her P.Eng designation. And then the firm she had been promised a position at had the account dry up, and the hiring freeze came down. And Adaeze had kept cleaning because the rent was due, and her mother's medication in Lagos was due, and there were no structural engineering positions for someone with a Canadian license, but no Canadian project history. She had kept cleaning. She had kept reading. She had kept her license current, even though no one here knew she had it, and she had been reading the Garfield drawings for 3 weeks. She had seen the J7 Kaitem error on the first night. She had gone home and run the numbers herself from memory on the back of an envelope. Then run them again and again. Chisholm was right. Completely, exactly right. And no one was listening to her. Adaeze set her mop against the wall. She pushed open the supply pouch on her cart and found what she was looking for. A paper napkin from the break room she'd already cleaned. A pencil stub she kept clipped to the inside of her uniform pocket. The way she had kept a pencil since she was a student. Always a pencil, never a pen, because pencils could be corrected. She stood in the hallway for 16 seconds. Then she went in. Chisholm was asleep at her desk, her cheek on her forearm, her hair falling across a printout of the disputed load model. The office looked like someone had been trying to solve a problem with sheer paper volume. Calculations on every surface, 3 different colored highlighters, a whiteboard covered edge to edge. Adaeze stood in the doorway and looked at the whiteboard. There. Second line from the bottom. The moment where the error compounded. The assumption about soil-bearing capacity plugged in as a constant when it should have been modeled as a range. She looked at the drawings on the desk, at Chisholm, at the door. She pulled out the napkin. She wrote the two equations. The corrected bearing capacity range on the left, the resulting load redistribution formula on the right, and underneath. Check the load path on column J7. She folded the napkin once and tucked it under the corner of the top drawing, where it would be impossible to miss. She picked up her cart handle. She left. She did not look back. 19 seconds inside the office. Marcus would later confirm it from the footage. The cleaning woman entered at 11:47 p.m. and left at 11:47 p.m. 19 seconds from door to door. On her way out, she passed the lobby. "Early night on 12?" Marcus asked. A Daisy paused at the desk. Something in her face that Marcus had not seen before, something settled, like a decision that had already been made and could not be unmade. "Night, Marcus." She walked out into the Toronto night, November, the first cold that actually bites. She turned up her collar and walked to the bus stop and did not look back at the building. Chisholm Eze woke up at 6:02 a.m. to the sound of the cleaning cart in the hallway and realized she had slept in her office again. She sat up, rolled her neck, reached for her coffee and found it ice cold. And then she saw the napkin, white, folded once, sticking out from under the blueprint roll like something had been deliberately placed there. She unfolded it. Two equations, one line of text. She read them, read them again. Check the load path on column J7. Her first thought was that she had written it herself and forgotten, the way you sometimes find notes in your own handwriting that you have no memory of making. But the handwriting was not hers. It was more precise than hers, more compressed, like someone who was used to writing in the margins of technical documents where space was limited. She pulled up the load model on her screen. She plugged in the corrected bearing capacity range from the left equation. The load redistribution formula on the right followed automatically, and the numbers that came back were not what she had been given. They were not what Gerald Park had approved. They were what she had been trying to say for 6 weeks, now expressed so cleanly and simply that she could not understand how anyone had looked at this and seen something different. Column J7 and the 4 adjacent columns in the J series were carrying a load they could not sustain under the actual soil conditions. The approved design was wrong. She had been right. The napkin had just shown her the language to prove it in a way that no one could dismiss. Her hands were shaking when she picked up her phone. She called Gerald Park at 6:09 a.m. He did not answer. She called Peter Clifton. He answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "Chisholm, it's 6 in the morning, I know. I need you in the building. I found something. Someone found something. The J column series. Peter, the design has to be reviewed before we break ground. I have the proof now. I have the equations." A pause. "Where did you get equations at 6 in the morning?" She looked at the napkin in her hand. "Someone left them for me." Peter Clifton arrived at 7:15, Gerald Park at 7:40, unhappy about it. 2 other senior engineers filed in by 8. They stood around Chisholm's desk, the napkin in the center of the table, 2 equations on a folded paper napkin that had been sitting under a blueprint roll in a locked office. The math was not debatable. That was the part that kept landing on all of them. It was not an argument. It was not a perspective. It was 2 equations that any licensed structural engineer should have worked through in the original design phase, and the conclusion they reached was not ambiguous. Gerald Park stood with his arms crossed and his face very still. "This changes the foundation design," he said finally. "Yes," Chisholm said. "That's what I've been saying." Peter Clifton was not looking at the drawings. He was holding the napkin, turning it over, reading the handwriting, Who else had access to this office last night? Just the cleaning crew, Chisholm said. I was here until almost midnight. There was no one else on the floor. Peter set the napkin down. I need to see the security footage. The security office was Marcus's territory. He had it warm in there, a space heater under the desk, a half-eaten bran muffin on the console. He pulled up the footage without being asked because he had already watched it twice that morning, alone, and he already knew what he was about to show them. Floor 12. Timestamp 11:47 p.m. They watched the footage in silence. Empty hallway. The sweep of a mop at the far end. Then the cart appearing, stopping outside Chisholm's office. A woman in a dark green uniform. She stood at the door for 16 seconds. Went in, 19 seconds, came back out, cart in hand, and continued down the hall without a change in her pace, like someone who had simply done what needed to be done. Peter leaned forward. Who is that? Marcus folded his hands on the desk. Adeze Nwosu. She's been on the night cleaning crew here for 11 years. How does a cleaner know about load path calculations? Marcus said nothing. He had learned, in 11 years of watching Adeze move through that building, that she was not a woman who needed him to answer for her. Peter turned to Gerald. Get me her file from the building service contractor. Gerald was already on his phone. It was Chisholm who went to her own laptop. She typed the name into the search bar. Adeze Nwosu, structural engineer, Lagos. The results loaded. She read the first 3 lines of the first result, and then she stopped reading and sat back in her chair because what was on that screen was not what she had expected. She turned the laptop toward Peter. He leaned in. He read. He straightened. He was quiet for a long moment. She has her PN, he said. Not a question. She's been licensed in Ontario for 4 years, Chisholm said. Her voice was very controlled. Before that, she was a licensed structural engineer in Nigeria for 5 years. She worked on the Lekki-Epe Bridge access infrastructure. She worked on 2 federal highway overpasses in Abuja. She paused. And she's been mopping our floors for 11 years. The room was quiet. Gerald Park set his phone down on the table. He did not say anything. Peter Clifton looked at the napkin, at the laptop screen, at Chisholm, who was looking back at him with an expression that was not triumph, but was something close to the bone, underneath triumph, the thing that lives beneath it, grief that a victory even needed to happen this way. He picked up his phone. Find me Adeze Nwosu, he said to whoever answered, and tell her I'd like to speak with her. Please. She was at home when they called, asleep. It was 9:30 in the morning, and she had been home for 3 hours, and she was asleep on top of the covers with her uniform still on one leg and her phone on the pillow. She listened to the voicemail. She sat up. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She called her mother in Lagos. The call connected on the second ring the way it always did, because Ngozi Nwosu had a specific ringtone set for her daughter, and she answered it the way you answer something you've been waiting for. Ada, Mama, something happened. She didn't tell her mother everything, not yet. She said only that someone at her job had seen her work and wanted to speak with her, that she didn't know what it meant. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Did you do something good? I think so. Then go, her mother said, and sit like you belong there, because you do. Adeze showered. She changed into the one outfit she owned that she thought of as her professional clothes, dark slacks. A burgundy blouse she had bought secondhand on Queen Street West, her good coat, the gray one with the structured collar. She had not worn this outfit to a work meeting in 4 years. She took the subway back to the office. She had cleaned 12 hours earlier. Marcus was still at the desk when she walked through the lobby. His shift had ended at 5 a.m., but he had stayed. She knew when she saw him that he had stayed on purpose. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. He handed her a coffee. Go on up. Room's on 12. Don't let Gerald Park's face put you off. That's just his face." She smiled, took the coffee, went to the elevator. The 12th floor boardroom had glass on 3 sides. You could see the whole floor from inside it, the rows of drafting desks, the plotters, the pinned-up site plans. The Toronto skyline was visible to the north, November gray, the CN Tower half lost in low cloud. Peter Clifton was at the head of the table, Gerald Park to one side, quiet in a way that occupied a great deal of space. 2 other senior engineers, Chisholm standing near the window. Adaze walked in and did not look at the mop closet she had unlocked 10,000 times at the end of this hallway. She sat down. Peter cleared his throat. "Ms. Nwosu, thank you for coming in. Of course, we've seen the security footage from last night, and we've done some research on your background." He paused. "Can you explain what you saw in the Garfield drawings?" Adaze set her coffee on the table. She looked at the room. Some faces were open. One was not. The load path model for the J-column series rests on a soil-bearing capacity value that's been inputted as a fixed constant, she said, but the geotechnical report from Phase 1 gives a range, not a constant, because the site has variable fill depth. When you use the low end of that range, which is appropriate for a conservative structural model, the differential settlement over time exceeds safe limits. The design needs the load redistributed across the K-column series. The foundation footings for J7 through J11 need to be enlarged. No one spoke. "Ims, Nusu," Gerald said. "How long have you known this?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks. He said it without expression. "Your team had flagged it internally." She looked at Chisholm. She had it right. She had been saying it for 6 weeks. I only confirmed what she already knew. Peter Clifton leaned forward. "We found your credentials, your PN, registration, your history in Nigeria." He paused. "You've been licensed in Ontario for 4 years. Yes, and you've been on our cleaning crew for 11 years. Yes." The room sat with that for a moment. "Why didn't you say something?" one of the other engineers asked. A young man genuinely puzzled, not unkind. "When you saw the error, why not come to us directly?" Adaze looked at him. He was asking an honest question. She gave him an honest answer. "The last time I raised a structural concern to people who hadn't asked for my opinion, I was told I didn't belong in the room. That was in Lagos, years ago, a building project. I raised concerns about a retaining wall design, and the site supervisor told me to go back to my desk and do what I was paid to do." She paused. "The wall failed 2 years later. Nobody was hurt, but I thought about it for a long time." She looked around the table. "I have been careful since then about the rooms I walk into without being invited." Silence. It was Chisholm who spoke first. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "But you came in anyway, last night." "You had the right answer," Adaze said. "You had it for 6 weeks, and you were going to stop believing in it. I could hear it." She paused. "I didn't want to watch that happen." Peter Clifton stood up. He came around the table and he stopped in front of Adaze, and he extended his hand. "Mrs. Nwosu, I owe you more than I know how to say in one conversation. You've been in this building for 11 years and we have failed to see you." He held her gaze. "I'd like to begin correcting that, if you're open to it." Adaze looked at his hand. She looked at Chisholm, who was pressing her lips together very hard. She looked at the window, at the gray November sky, at the skyline she had been looking at from the inside of mop closets and supply rooms for 11 years. She shook his hand. "What are you proposing?" she asked. "A role on the Garfield project, starting with the foundation redesign. Proper compensation, proper title." He paused. "We'll need to have a broader conversation about the last 4 years of you holding a PN while cleaning our boardrooms. That conversation will involve our HR team and probably an uncomfortable amount of introspection on our part. I'm not looking for an apology." You're going to get one anyway, he said it plainly. But I understand that's not why you're here. Why did you leave the note? A day's thought about Chisam, asleep at her desk, about her mother's voice on the phone, about the retaining wall in Lagos, about 11 years of reading drawings in the dark. Because the building deserved to be right, she said. 200 people are going to live in it. She looked at Chisholm. And because someone was working herself to nothing trying to fix a problem she had already solved, and she reminded me of who I was before I decided it was safer to be invisible. The Garfield Foundation design was reviewed and amended over the following 6 weeks. The J-column footings were enlarged. The load was redistributed across the K-series with modifications to the basement transfer slab. 3 external engineers were brought in to audit the revised drawings. All 3 confirmed the correction. Groundbreaking was delayed by 8 weeks. The developer was unhappy. Peter Clifton told him plainly that the alternative was breaking ground on a flawed design and managing the consequences in year 7. The developer stopped being unhappy. Adeze Nwosu was brought onto the Garfield project team as a senior structural engineer. She was given an office on the 11th floor, 1 floor below the project team, because she asked for a quieter space, and 1 floor down was quieter. She had a desk, a plotting station, and a window that looked south toward the lake. She did not keep a mop in the corner. Chisholm came to her office in the 2nd week with a folder and a question about the transfer slab geometry, and they worked through it together for 2 hours, and at some point it stopped being a question and became a conversation. The kind you have with someone whose mind moves at the same speed yours does and meets you at every turn. They had many more of those conversations. Gerald Park completed the Garfield project and retired the following year. He sent Adeze an email before he left. 4 sentences. He said he had been wrong. He said he was sorry. He said he hoped she understood that the profession was better for having her in it. She read it 3 times and then wrote back 2 sentences because she had learned that some acknowledgments do not require a long reply. On the day the Garfield building topped out, 42 stories above street level, Peter Clifton sent a note to the project team. It named each person who had contributed to the structural revision. Adeze's name was first on the list. She read the note in her office, alone, with the lake visible in the distance and a coffee going cold on her desk. She thought about her mother, about the retaining wall, about the night she had stood in a hallway in a dark green uniform, listening to a young woman cry about a problem she already knew how to solve. About the 19 seconds it had taken to change the direction of her own life, because she had finally decided that what was inside the building mattered more than what people assumed about the person carrying the mop. She called Lagos. Her mother answered on the 2nd ring. Mama. I have something to tell you. Some people carry their whole education in silence, not because they have nothing to say, but because every time they said it before, someone told them they were standing in the wrong room. Adeze Nwosu was a licensed structural engineer for 4 years before anyone in her industry in this country knew her name. She held a credential they had never asked her about. She saw errors they had never given her the chance to correct. She mopped the floors of a firm that needed her and did not know it yet. She did not leave that napkin for recognition. She left it because a building full of people deserved a foundation that would hold. And because a young woman who was right about everything was about to stop trusting herself. Don't walk past people. You have no idea what they are carrying. You have no idea who they were before the world decided they should be invisible. Some of them, if you would just stop and ask, would change everything you thought you knew about the room you're standing in. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and come back for the next one. because every story on this channel is about someone the world counted out. And sometimes the most important people in a building are the ones you pass every night without learning their name.